Welcome again to the new Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show. Adventure series is. I'm Dean Bell here with Dean Kevin. And Dean Kevin will give it over to you for your experiences, which we'll comment on and discuss after you're done. Thank you for being here.
In this real side experience, I would initially find myself on the ground floor of my physical level house recreated. The consciousness of the agreements and attachments that I would be aware and fully conscious of, as opposed to the other parts of the house, such as the attic, the basement, and other areas that could be construed as a storage, that which is not in the living areas of the house, and so representing agreements, attachments, that which we are not conscious of. And so any individual that features on the ground floor, or indeed any situation taking place there, is through agreements we are conscious of and maintaining, although we may occasionally find individuals and situations transpiring on the ground floor that the personal self may ponder over, therefore, as we have unwelcome intrusions, as we have situations we rather would not have taking place, and yet all that must be based on conscious agreements we are making or maintaining that have them feature on the ground floor, as is the representation of ground floor scenes and individuals being based on a conscious agreement. But very often the conscious agreement is not directly with the individuals we find featuring there, but through agreements to others. We agree in fact with everything their consciousness comprises of also, all the agreements that make up its construction. So as we open up to individuals, as we agree to them, we very often are taking on and allowing far more into our experience than we realize, especially if the individual is personal self-immersed, and yet we retain agreements, as they may be our family or friends, etc. For every consciousness is interwoven with inconceivable quantities of karmic entanglement, tapline agreements, and interspersed and interwoven through all consciousness is the underlying agreement to a control and restriction, agreement to the dark forces that has had the consciousness gradually adjusted and fashioned in a design that effects a simulator the controller's desire. And if an individual is personally self-focused and immersed, they stand then in agreement with their consciousness and with this overall control that their consciousness is based upon. And when we agree with such a personal self, one-dimensional unconscious people, we agree with their consciousness also. We merge as though two consciousnesses and combine the programs that have then the potentiality of the ideas that the consciousness of others comprises of, effecting into our experience. And with agreement to controllers that all consciousness is riddled with, we then rather take these agreements on also. So can the controllers march into our experience through a kind of a backdoor agreement, and this then is how we may find unsavoury characters or situations occurring in our experiences, and often on the ground floors of our recreated houses on the real side, representing conscious agreements that have inadvertently allowed the presence of the dark forces, the ill-intended, and situations and circumstances of an abrasive nature. Of course, as we go through creation, as we share, as we present the ears, we are always engaging with individuals of all levels of awareness, for indeed we are trying to reach the unconscious unaware, as every being that steps up retracts agreement from a consciousness that is of control and restriction, and is contributing to simulator demise. For as they step up, they have decided to be more than what their consciousness comprises of, so that very decision, regardless of where they are in their process of awareness, is agreement withdrawn from the consciousness of restriction. But as we do approach and interact with the unaware and personal self immersed, we must agree with them that we can feature in their experience. We incorporate them for the time we need to share or engage with them in whatever form that takes, and therein lies the windows of opportunity for the ever-watching dark forces. Although it's more an in and out situation, but often time enough for adverse situations and characters to feature in our experience. This would be one such case, where there was an individual on the ground floor of my house, but one that I had the impression was of a sincere intent, and it followed then that I had extended agreement to him that our simulated experiences combine, and I could share with him the opportunity of becoming more aware, or whatever beneficial, making sense with the life reason I had for extending agreement to him. But as I was explaining, with individuals comes more than you see on the surface, and agreement with him had opened a window where another also was present, an ill-intended character, and a very formidable individual at that, very adept and capable. But it seems the ill-intended individual, capable as he was, elected to only assail the sincere individual, as though perhaps recognizing that my real awareness would afford me protection that would trump his capabilities. For as creationally powerful as an individual may be, they tend to be no match for a real awareness that can deal with any situation, or with the recognition of the real awareness, even allow that an individual being attacked can step from the simulated personal side altogether, withdrawing a complete agreement from it by stepping into the nowness of the real awareness, isness, reality, and aside from anything, any created idea, that an individual doing so can be the effects of. But as I decided to assist the individual, I would then be operating on the personal side, taking on the effects through agreement with the idea of what was overall transpiring, and then have to deal with the simulated consequences. And as I attempted to intercede, the dark force assailant created a kind of simulated overlap that made it so that I couldn't perceive what was taking place. I no longer could see the attack, and it was almost as though I was sifting through filters and dimensions to try and reach the one who was being assailed. This was evidently an ability of the dark force attacker, and it was as though that as I agreed with the situation, I agreed with this dark force character's ability to impose such a skill upon my simulated experience also. And although he perhaps recognized that attacking me would be folly, he was able to thwart my ability to reach the sincere individual he was assaulting. It was a little like how agreements through the consciousness have allowed the controllers to place cyberspace overlaps over the simulator through agreements that have people seeing it as they have decided it to be, how it has been marketed, like the heavens of man in all their splendor, and not a simulator in darkness, as it in fact is. And this seemed along similar lines, as agreement with this dark force character through the sincere individual also extended agreement permission that he could add these filters which concealed what was taking place. I would never then manage to reach the attacked person, and the scene would switch. Perhaps the experience did continue on, but what transpired was lost to my personal self-view. It does reveal how there are very capable, creational, manipulating, dark force characters at large, and with individuals just stepping up, and therefore not as proficient at handling themselves until they recognize and stand more in their real awareness, they can be rather vulnerable. And perhaps then, as everyone's simulation is according to the agreements they have made consciously and unconsciously, very often as we step into their simulation, we are somewhat limited by the design of it, can only intercede, and by what extent, according to the agreement parameters they have set. If their agreements allow their attacks to be, even if they are not conscious of them, it is their free will decision to experience such, and will play out accordingly. And these dark force characters can have their way, despite our best efforts to assist. In the next scene, I found myself in a large building that seemed to represent then the collective consciousness of all the individuals that dwelt within it. Evidently then, agreement had been extended that would allow my presence there also, and my impression was that all those I found there were of the one-dimensional, unconscious variety. I had the sense that I had entered what were their real side experiences, but that for these individuals they had little consideration or interest for what took place for them on the real side, dismissing what transpired as mere dreams and of little consequence. And everyone there seemed in a kind of zombie-like state, almost trance-like, as they shuffled back and forth, indicating their unconsciousness, and how they simply operated from the personal self-routines they had established for themselves, almost like on automatic, consciousness-driven pilot, with their awareness asleep at the wheel. I determined that it wouldn't be likely that such individuals would be accepting of much beyond their creationally established comfort zones of ideas, but I did try and was successful in gleaning the attention of a few who seemed a little more inclined to poke their heads out from their created bubble illusions. For the others, it was as though they didn't even register my presence. I managed to impress upon the few who were listening that they were, in fact, dreaming, as I would work with references they could relate to, and that they could take conscious control of their dreams and do whatever they wanted in them, and as such I had them all taking to the air, as though with invisible wings, and we flew back and forth around the building, above the heads of the others, who seemed to have no perception of anything beyond whatever it was that comprised of their decided reality. I had the impression I had instilled in the small group the idea of the pursuit of exploring more, the dream arena, and that this would very likely filter through to their personal selves on the physical, and maybe progress into their own respective journeys of ears recognition. The scene switched again, and I found myself standing in my physical level street recreated, that as things currently stand, and through the widening of it by the real guides, has represented my agreement for the influx of more people into the street, that was widened to accommodate them, individuals that will be entering my experience as I continue sharing and promoting the ease. Here stood now a single individual, one I didn't recognize, a black lady who was requesting my assistance. She would explain how her son had decided to become more aware, and was stepping up with Dwayne and the real guides, but by doing so he had been captured and imprisoned by the dark forces on the real side. As is often the case, as the dark forces forever watch the real side, they can determine if individuals are experiencing in such a way that suggests they are becoming more aware, if they are starting to operate beyond their established consciousness of control and restriction, and the experiences that would normally stem from such, that which they had been resigning themselves to. For if a people become more aware, as their experiences reflect this on the real side, the dark forces fear losing their slaves, that through their agreements maintain their controlling positions, and a simulator according to their design specifics. And so the controllers will be moved to attempt to disrupt, intimidate, attack, and even imprison individuals on the real side, especially as when individuals first begin their processes of awareness, they are far more vulnerable, as they have not recognized how to step into their real awareness more so, that through doing so will afford them greater protection. They operate initially more so through a personal self that, infused with agreements to the controllers that the consciousness of it will be, can have the dark forces enter their real side experiences and impose themselves upon them in whatever way they desire. And I've had a few real side experiences recently where I've shared how the dark forces are grabbing every individual they can, of those stepping up and beginning their awareness processes, and locking them down in areas of the real side, where then rescue operations are required to liberate those imprisoned, but always having to work within the agreement parameters of each individual, agreements that present the individual's decided simulation and the effects the rescue team have to operate within. This lady would tell me the name of her son, but unfortunately I couldn't bring it back to the personal self on waking. But if I heard it spoken, I would recognize it. Although again, agreement, very likely subconscious, had allowed her son's capture, as he would be operating predominantly through the personal self at his rudimentary stage in his process of awareness. A personal self, where the consciousness, infused with controllers' agreements as it would be, would allow then such potential attack and containment situations. But he had extended agreement for his rescue, and the mother would lead me to a building made of metal, a dark force compound, where not only her son was contained, but others also, as formidable as the structure appeared, as it presented as a building where entry would be impossible. I simply passed through the walls of it like a ghost. I would float through the interior of the building, winding my way through passages and rooms. All were filled with various rank and file dark force characters who would demand that I exit immediately. I could have ventured through the building invisible, from my real awareness position, and not featured in the simulation for all to see, but I found this more amusing, as I presented in a form that they could do nothing about, an ethereal form like smoke, that couldn't be apprehended, and all they could do was shout and protest as to my presence. Finally, I reached a central area, where the woman's son was held captive, and there he would be sat, in a central section, like a raised platform, with a group of others, all in the approximate 10-year-old category, I'd have said. Although agreeing to be rescued, agreement was also extended through the consciousness that could allow not only imprisonment and containment, but attack, and so I would rather take this karma on, agree to experience the effects of a simulation these children had really decided for themselves. But as they all were sincere with their process of awareness, as was my impressions, so would it make sense to extend them assistance. It would be as though the children had files in their computer game simulations that dictated that they were to be attacked by these dark force characters at this moment, and I was rather taking these files, these causes, this karma, and installing it into my computer simulation instead, taking their impending simulated predicament off their hands. And so, agreement with the overall idea had me having to operate from the simulated side, as I would now be the effects of what I was taking on. But with the real awareness comes the ability to deal with real side situations, as it utilizes whatever is required for the task at hand, if we are agreeing through the personal self that it can, and we don't sabotage its effectiveness through the personal self with any contradictory agreements that diminish our real awareness capabilities. And so, as the children watched from their raised platform, in would stomp these gigantic robotic-like beings. Each were easily 60 feet in height and comprising of black metal, and as they attacked, so would I defend myself, as they were the effects of their own abrasiveness. And so really, it's not that we are fighting or battling, but almost as though, due to the abrasive decisions of such characters, that they choose to attack and impose on others, so must they be the effects of what they have decided, and this translates as them being the recipients of the nature of that which they have chosen, as everything balances itself out, and this expressed as my defeating and putting down their assault. So really, through what they had decided, they actually smashed themselves to pieces. For as we are, the same overall awareness that operates through all the individual consciousness personal selves, even though the personal self perhaps doesn't recognize this and assumes they are separate from all others. Really then, an attack on another is an attack on yourself. So, as you are abrasive to others, you are actually attacking a personal vehicle that is animated by the same overall awareness that animates your own. So if you attack yourself, then you must experience the effects of doing so. And although this takes a few moments in cause-to-effect simulation, effects that show up somewhere down the road, as you being in an equally as abrasive situation, on the real side, and in actuality, these effects are instantly so, as we are instantly what we decide, and so this expresses, in whatever way it does, on the simulated personal arena, on the real side, life is. In this case, the robots receiving the effects instantly of that which they had decided to cause, or as instantly as would be visually understandable and relatable to the personal self. And as the dust settled, so were the children liberated. The platform they were placed upon descended, and although I never saw what transpired next, as the scene faded, my impression was that the children were safe from the dark force clutches and could continue on with their processes of awareness. And there was a final scene where it was as though I was taking a little break, a little time out for my personal self, as I entered what seemed to be a large recreational complex full of various aliens and beings and body types, all of which just relaxing with the various entertainments provided. There were bars serving drinks, etc. As I entered, although my personal self had no recollection of ever having been here before, I produced a kind of key card and scanned it at the reception area, where the receptionist nodded acknowledgement and welcomed me back, and stated how it had been a while since I'd been here last. So perhaps a place I do frequent occasionally on the real side, a kind of intergalactic alien recreational facility, and no impressions of it being in any way dark force created or affiliated with did I receive. As you always must be aware of dark force real side creations, that the agreements too will have you consequently tap-lined by. And although evidently I had been there before, I had my key card, I knew my way around, I was recognized by the receptionist and other alien beings also in attendance, only now has my personal self been shown this. Duane the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Yes, as the adventure moves along, As people become more aware, they get to take on situations like you, and it becomes more fun. We take on the challenge of that and others, so we're never bored, and there's always more to do. It's always looking for that sincere intent.
So you do have some friends at the Star Wars bar that you were in there. They recognized you, and
Yeah, it was really surreal. It's like I walked in there, I didn't know what was going on, why I was even there, but I just walked in there as though I knew the place, knew where to go, produced my key card, said hello to the receptionist, and I went in there and was interacting and talking with all the various aliens and sipping intergalactic drinks and martinis. And then while I was there, I had the recognition through the impressions of the real awareness that I had been there before, but that was the first time my personal self had been shown, that particular place. So
can you describe any of their body types? Do you remember any of those?
it's quite strange because when you're on the real side, everything you see generally makes perfect sense while you're there. But when you bring it back to the personal self and you're trying to explain it, all you have are the references and experiences that your personal self has as reference files in its current memory body to relate to. And so very often what made perfect sense and was easily describable while you were on the real side, because then you could access all the information through all of creation through your real awareness, which would have seen every possible body form that's ever been created in the simulator. But when you come back, all you've got is what you've only seen through the personal self. And so very often, as I said, you just simply can't describe what you saw. A bit like the experience the other day where I saw those strange, well, on the galactic experience I shared, where I encountered all these strange mythological beings, and Ronald asked me to describe them. And I said they were just, at the time, they made sense, but when I brought them back, they were indescribable, and the best I could do was compare them to sort of mythological creatures, things like winged demons and such. But again, that wasn't entirely accurate, but we're as limited as the personal self-reference is, basically. So
Yeah. And these people you met, or you've been meeting, the capable ones, we're here in the physical, are the ones that are like the movie stars or the politicians or the authoritarians, the scientists, the queens, kings, generals. I mean, they seem like they're almost intimidating to the personal self, to the regular public, but it's just that they've decided to go that route, have that journey to become what they saw themselves to be, and they did it. But in no way does that mean they're aware. It's like the reptilians who have the technology. It's just a certain position in creation, that there's so much more to the awareness. And I like the way you handle yourself on the real side with the attacks, where the awareness supersedes everything that we say that. So in a way you can become invisible, or you can ward off things that you normally couldn't in the physical. Although in the physical it does make, here we have to take care, we have to drag around this physical body and take care of it. So even though we're aware, well, it does help us in survival. We have more options, but still it's a liability here, because the physical body is very vulnerable. Like Dwayne says, sometimes a little like sliver in your finger, it can take up your whole attention during the day. This a pebble in your shoe or something like that. I mean, your whole attention's riveted on that. So our bodies are very, very vulnerable to the environment, and it's part of what we're doing with the new presentation. We're helping people to provide a opportunity to have a position where they can become more aware in a position where they're not interfered with by governments and authorities and people out to harm us. So we're, as part of what we're doing with the university and the positions that we provide people with, that they can contribute to, and then they can become more aware and have a better survival in this world. But it's all about awareness, and it just makes sense to what life is about and survival is about. Become more aware. And like you say, it's more fun too. It gets to be, it's more, or like Dwayne said, you know, it's an adventure, it's fun. It's actually more fun than the thrills. You can still have your thrills in the physical, but it's fun in a greater sense where you have a purpose, you have a real sense of you're doing something for the benefit of everybody. Not a do-gooder, you know, it's not about that or anything, but just you're in an indifferent place where you're for everybody, for doing good, for doing something of a benefit for all of life. And then life recognizes you, and you get a chance to recognize it, and there's a relationship that's formed, and that's so cool because that's what life is about, our recognition of this isness and the relationship we form with it, the true love affair. So thanks, Kevin, again. You have another one?
In this real side experience, I would find myself in the company of a large group of people. I didn't really have any impressions as to who they were, if they were aware individuals or not, nor did I recognize any of them through my personal self. The setting seemed to be urban. Again, nothing I recognized, just a random, industrialized city of some type or other. Although suddenly we were all hit by a torrential rainfall, seemingly perhaps nothing out of the ordinary, but there was something altogether different about this rain. It had a very refreshing quality about it, and my impression was it was representing more than what it visually appeared to be, as all real side experiences generally do. It was as though we were being purified in a sense, having all that which represents as a self-decided restriction or limitation washed away in this rain. Of course, realistically, nothing or nobody can take from us the limited and restricted ideas we free will choose to cling onto, despite how unbeneficial they may be to life, awareness, and how detrimental they may be to the simulator they add to the demise of through the restricting nature they represent. More than an agreement on the part of myself and the others of this group that we were to release the ideas that were preventing us from moving forward at the point where we were in our respective processes of awareness. For as we proceed, we more and more need to refine the personal self, to have its attitudes more in line with the isness, that of gratitude, sincerity, etc., and we more so need to align all aspects of it, the 5 bodies, with the real intent, the real awareness, which is the recognition of the isness that the real awareness is. So as we continue, the aligning of the personal self is a continuous process, and also that which we have clung to had perhaps not presented as an issue up until a certain point, but then comes the moment where we have to start releasing these ideas, or we are rather stuck at that point, that the moving beyond where we are requires that we release these agreements and attachments, or we rather just revolve on the spot and go no further, and then the individual unable to proceed due to the reluctance to release that which must be let go of for the continuation of their process, very often will fall back into the personal self, as ultimately we have to let go and release every idea, for the holding on to anything is decision to continue experiencing it, and that can only then be so in restricting creation. Ideas can be played with, but we need to be able to continuously move to a position where we are not attached to them, that we can let them go, not carry them around and cling to them, and then just refer to them if required, like books on a shelf. And this, I had the impression, was then the situation here, that we were standing at a certain threshold, where to continue on required a further purging of limited ideas, attachments, and agreements, a greater personal self-alignment with the real intent and awareness. And so this then suggested that this group were individuals also on their process of awareness, and going through a similar agreed-to purification of the personal self, as it were, the street setting very much then representing the rigid density of a consciousness overall that makes no sense with life, as everything in modern times, the so-called civilized era, etc., is the culmination simulation of agreement to systems of control and restriction, systems and civilization that are destroying the planet and devastating to the natural environment, a consciousness that we all played a part in creating, that our agreements and attachments are interwoven with. We very much then are a product of the natural environment destroying civilizations we agreed to create. And now we stood then at this point where we were going through a further purification, removing that which still had us anchored to our current position, and as a further indication that this was so, a huge portal would manifest before the group, another option, another position being offered as a result of that which we had decided for ourselves, with everything equaling itself, positions in life reflecting decision, agreement, and intent, and positions beyond then this street of rigid restriction representation to something beyond, a more favourable position through this portal, as was my impression, and as I looked around the group, I would see two individuals in the form of Mulder and Scully from the X-Files, perhaps real guides, assuming these forms, as a further indication of this portal representing a stepping into the unknown, beyond what we had known and limited ourselves to up until this moment. Because the X-Files very much is about the unknown, the paranormal, the unexplained, that which is beyond the normal, the established, the routines of consciousness. I would never see what lay beyond the portal, as it was just a brief view of this potentiality. For the scene would switch to what seemed now a completely unconnected situation. I was flying on a plane with others, but my impressions here were that all the passengers were very one-dimensional, personal self-immersed, unconscious individuals. I had the sense that they were flying and rendezvousing with some elite group of individuals or controlling beings to make some kind of deal or negotiation, and that through the agreements that interconnect and intermesh the overall consciousness, can it be rather easy to, having stepped into the personal self, that there be endless potential agreements that allow my inclusion in the experience of others. It's almost like, from the real awareness overview position, the awareness that is everything and is through all consciousness, and the simulation that effects from its construction of decided ideas, can one sift through it all and find where there are agreements between the consciousnesses of individuals and our own personal self-consciousness that allows us to feature in their experience at any time, just as they can in ours, and so we can step into the personal self and find ourselves now participating in certain experiences with certain individuals for whatever reasons we may have for doing so. Sometimes to have certain experiences for our awareness, sometimes that we can have the personal self shown particular happenings in creation that we then can reveal and share and have everyone made aware of, or sometimes that we can have audiences and encounters with others through these agreement back doors, that we have the opportunity of sharing with them the ease, or to attempt to get their agreement in assisting us galactically with the great wake-up. On this occasion, it was as though I was to investigate and scout out a situation that involved elements of the controllers, and these individuals on the plane were somehow also in affiliation or agreement with these particular controllers. And now I was featuring in their experience, but they didn't seem concerned or suspicious as to my presence, as usually the one-dimensional unconscious masses generally are not very attentive, whereas the dark forces very often instantly have a sense when their simulated experiences are infringed upon by those that are spying on them, or by an individual that isn't in agreement with their control. For the dark forces can see to an extent on the real side what's going on. They can see that which Dwayne, the guides, and the new friends are doing, just as readily as they can see all those who are asleep, unconscious, and therefore operating on the real side, as unconscious individuals would, operating within the confines of a consciousness designed and managed by the controllers. The plane would land, and of the rest of the passengers there would be no further sign, as the scene skipped to where I was now in a kind of large mansion or other. As it transpired, the particular brand of dark force controllers these passengers were to meet were vampires. What seemed to be taking place was that, through agreements in the overall consciousness with the controllers that allowed them to feature in the experiences of all, and to be as abrasive as they desired, based on the agreements the slave masses extended to the controllers as having power over them, that some deal was extended, whereby vast numbers of humans were given somewhat of an ultimatum, that of wealth in exchange for some part of their internal body vehicles that the vampires seemingly required. And should the humans that were approached refuse, they would be killed. The impression I had was it was something heart-related, that even with as great a longevity of a lifespan that was typical of a vampire, their body types had recently become more distorted. Distortion of a body type always reflecting distortion of a consciousness, and that they required now not only blood to sustain themselves, but this additional part of the human heart that they would surgically mesh into their own bodies. And so there I would be, and in the company of Lindsay, my sister, suddenly, as agreement with Lindsay, and therefore all the ideas that her consciousness comprised of, was an agreement to what she was involved with, which suggested she was one of those accepting then of this curious vampiric offer, and now I could feature in her experience, which involved these vampires on the real side. Perhaps it was so that I was to be shown her involvement with the vampires, something to be aware of, as agreement with individuals has us taking on effect-wise much more than we see on the surface, and so I could have vampires encroaching on my physical level experience just as readily as on the real side, through my agreements with Lindsay. And as I said, the dark force controllers always can see when an individual is operating from a position beyond the boundaries they have established for their design of the consciousness that effects creation. And it was so here that the vampires, realizing I was not here to make this deal with them, but rather to spy on their activities, would assail me and Lindsay both, and we rather then had to defend ourselves. Never really a problem, as through real awareness we always have the tools and the means to handle ourselves, and especially the more aware we become, and if necessary we can move fully into the real awareness, a reality aside from creation, where we no longer are activating agreements or ideas that have us on the simulated real side and in a personal self that can be attacked. Maybe I then was choosing to remain in the simulated effects and defend against the vampires more for Lindsay's sake than my own, as my presence had resulted in Lindsay being attacked also, whereas she probably wouldn't have been had I not featured in her experience. Although safe as she might have been, how safe can anyone really be operating in the dark forces controlled matrix, where through agreements with them they can at any moment enter your experience and kill you if they so choose? Lindsay wouldn't recognize how to move beyond the personal self-simulated arena where her safety was assured, hence my deciding to remain in the simulated experience and defend her and myself. Eventually the vampires saw the folly of continuing with their attack. They relented, and after a while the scene would fade and the experience would end. So just a report of more activities the dark forces, the vampires in particular, are involved in, and how they are seemingly approaching humans with financial incentives to surrender a part of their heart, that the vampires' physical bodies remain viable, as they continue to distort them through the choices they make. Duane the Great Writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "It shows that the vampire bodies, through their decided karma and the effects that they're getting, and with all the pressure and that which they're creating, that they're being affected too, and they're having to maintain themselves, etc. The good old days are gone. We're in the present time here. So it's all about awareness, and we have that. It's all about paying attention, and there's a lot to do, a lot to experience. It's all right here, right in front of everyone's face. And it comes into the physical realm here, and a lot of people are going to wonder how this came to happen. Again, we keep warning them because of the consciousness and the unconscious agreements that everybody has, and how it affects here, and how necessary it is to wake up here also.
Notice how the reptilians and the bad guys are always alert because they don't want to, they know what they're doing and they want to protect what they've created, and the people, the general public, are asleep basically and passive and want to maintain what they think is their la-la land. In a way that the bad guys are, in a way, they're more creative, they're willing to take the risk, and they know it's about survival, their survival. The difference is they're not doing it for the whole, like the real guides, but they are paying attention, as much as they can. And yeah, so I was wondering how you saw that, how you ended up in this place, you just like popped in. How you see it that you were there? The real guides gave you this experience, or your real awareness brought you there? When you go into experiences, how is it that you're there? Sometimes you just pop into some area or some position. Is it sometimes a real guide you can tell it's an experience real guides put you in, or was it your own doing? Or how is it, that you're there suddenly, somewhere?
Well, the whole process is about awareness and becoming more aware. And as you set that intent, so will life, the real awareness, and the guides then give you the opportunities by which you can be places through which, by being there, you can become more aware and continue on with your process of awareness. So generally it all pivots off of the intent. And if the intent to become more aware, to see more, and to be more, and then to ultimately recognize the is through all the comparisons that all the experiences provide, and to go through the process of releasing all the tap lines or becoming conscious of them that bind you to creation. If the intent to do that is there, then you will consistently find yourself in these experiences by which you can go through the process. And it's, of course, this is all on the simulated side, and it is still the simulation, but nevertheless, it is the personal self that has to be shown, that has to align its intent and free will choice with the real intent. And then through that which is shown as a result of the process, then the real awareness has all the references and experiences it needs then as the comparisons to recognize the is from. And so basically, as long as your intent is always there with your real awareness and to recognize the is, then you'll just constantly be popping into these experiences which will allow you to become more aware, allow you to experience and see more than you have previously. So, and also that you'll be able to share it with others, and they can benefit also from becoming more aware through which you are sharing. And then of course you also have the opportunity to be shown situations that are coming up in creation due to agreements that are being made now, which will be then these future views. And so that's, with me, I simply will just find myself in those situations, and you can sort of break it down quite technically, as I said, to feature in anything simulated, you have to agree with the specifics of the ideas that allow you to be the effects of whatever the simulate ideas you wish to see. And so we have all these situations where we have all these individuals with their own little arenas of simulation. We have all this agreement that is interspersed through the overall consciousness, which as you step into, you can find all these backdoor agreements, because everything is sort of interconnected and interlocked, and everything is, realistically, everything is an agreement with everything else through the consciousness, particularly with a simulator that's as old as this one is. And so pretty much you can have the view and the experience of anything that there ever has been ever in the simulator on the real side. And again, all for the purposes ultimately of becoming more aware.
Yeah, and the real guides see what we need, or see what we're lacking, or see what would benefit us, so that they can see the bigger picture of that. So they provide experiences for us sometimes for that benefit. And then,
Yeah, because I was going to say, because in that situation, I had the impression that the guys wanted me to be made aware of some of the potentialities of attack that could be that I could experience through my agreement association with Lindsay, because she has quite a strange consciousness, and she has quite a lot of strange attachments and agreements through the consciousness. And very often, when I engage with her on the real side for whatever reason, I do get opened up to a lot of these attacks. So I think the main part of that was not only that they were giving me something that I could then present to the world, so people so that people can be aware of what the dark forces are doing and all the various things they are doing and the various expressions of and all their minions and such, and the vampires and what they're up to. But also that I was made aware of, the possibility of vampires encroaching into my experience as I maintain my agreements with Lindsay. And so,
and also, these experiences are not always going to be easy. I mean, we have to face everything in creation, so to speak. So a lot of times it's a challenge, but it's for, again, it's for us to wake up, and it's necessary. That's why we're here. So what we're given is necessary in a way, and then we get through it and we move on, and in a way we don't have to deal with it anymore. And we can help others deal with it better because we've gone through it, that whole thing. We're here in this time and place here in this age here, so let's see what we can do. It's quite a challenge, because what Dwayne's doing is taking on the whole creation. I mean, it's not like some of the old masters who just like sit there and do whatever, preach love and truth, but he's taking it all on. He's willing to face it and face the beings involved in creation that are doing these things, that are creating this havoc, etc. So it's like, I always wanted to be on the front lines, that's where the adventure is. So here we are, let's see what we can do. So thank you, Kevin, again, for everything you do, for sharing. Anything else you'd like to end with?
well, it's just that also, I mean, as you go through your experiences lifetime to lifetime, you also get to learn of what not to do that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But on the real side, it's almost like you can have an accelerated program with that also, and you could be shown other people doing that which doesn't make sense, and so therefore it saves you the time of possibly going through what they are going through, and seeing it on the real side. So it makes it so then that instills in you and impresses upon you all the various expressions of being that don't make sense with the life, and so it saves you having to go through the laborious process of cause and effect on the physical, and finding out for yourself firsthand. So it's all in all, it's a far more accelerated program all around, really, and you can learn as much from others as you can from your personal experiences, and that's part of it as well. You can see potentially anything in creation, anything, all simulated experiences.
That's why we share. Yeah, that's why it's so important to share. And that's why you're doing this. That's great. Okay. So new you.
Yeah.